Welcome to the Decentralized Mind podcast. I'm your host, Emanuela, and today I have Eyla Cuenca with me. And she is so many things: birth guide, educator, health freedom advocate, and more. Doula, everything. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I have two little kids. One of them I had at home with a midwife, and the other one was a free birth, just me and my husband. And I want to maybe start the conversation with how you find, because it's about, I want to talk about how we think a lot as it relates to health, because I think that this affects our choices.
Yeah.
And because you educate people, right? And I'm assuming most of the time you get them at pregnancy before birth.
Yeah, oh gosh. I'd say it's like equal amounts of before getting pregnant, already pregnant, or just newly postpartum and trying to figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's it's the full arc, I would say.
And how much of a difference have you seen between, say, people who are already questioning things, already thinking differently about their health, about their birth choices, already coming with a certain amount of education, maybe spending more time in nature, and how that affects the decisions that they make, the amount of autonomy that they're able to have on out of their own mind in the birth process or postpartum, and then this is like a multifaceted question. And then their anxiety levels at the end, right? Like when they have the baby.
Yeah, I guess on the whole, the people who are already coming from a place of questioning the conventional wisdom and already doing their own research and trying to live life in general in a more self-sovereign way, I'd say that the birth path tends to be a little bit or more easeful for them. Um, Simply because they already are engaging in that type of questioning. They're already, excuse me, engaging in that type of self reflection. So there is like, we skip over that learning part. Sometimes when people are just coming into a space of self awareness when they're approaching their pregnancy, there's a lot more to unpack, um, if we go deeply into it. So, yeah, already being in that space of gleaning education and questioning the narrative and seeing what's possible beyond what we've been told just makes it a lot more expansive and, again, just easeful in general for that couple.
And when it comes to birth experiences, the amount, have you seen a correlation between the amount of hands-on that they receive, like as a broad term, during birth, like the amount of practitioners involved, or if they're in the hospital or at home, and between the amount of anxiety or difficulty they have with the baby when it comes to making their own decisions instead of outsourcing every decision?
Yeah, I think in a sense, what I've seen is when women are allowing that amount of intervention to go on, that amount of I guess, interference, let's say, with their process, there is inherently a disconnect between them and their body. Because if we're really connected, if we're really tuned in to what's going on with our body, we are less likely to have that many people involved in the etheric field and the physical field of the body. So yeah, I often find that the more dissociation that's occurring in that woman in general, the more susceptible or inclined she is to participate in a lot of interventions.
And then how does that translate into, you know, lots of, I see around me, sorry, lots of new moms that, aren't in my space or clients or anything like that. But every time there's a little concern, it's immediately Google, mom forums, doctor, ER, walk-in clinic. Like it's like, right, any little thing, it's like, oh, my baby is breathing funny at night. What do I do? Like it's this constant uncertainty. And probably part of it is that we're not around babies enough as, young adults.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. Just we don't have exposure to babies. We also, at this point in our evolution, most likely didn't grow up in a home that had multiple generations in it. Like your grandmother living there, an aunt, perhaps her children, you know what I mean? So we just don't see the many stages of life growing up. Multi-generational households just don't really exist that much, especially in the West. So, yeah, we don't have that exposure. And we also were never taught about our own bodies. You know, most girls just don't really get a lot of education about how to handle and work with their own body. Often, when a girl is wondering about her body when she's prepubescent, there's a lot of shame wrapped up in what it is to be a young girl. You know, and we might not even think of it that way. We might say, oh no, no one shamed me. But the fact that your body wasn't celebrated or protected, is a form of neglect and part of the reason that you don't know about your own body now today as a woman, If we knew these things, if we were taught about these things, we wouldn't be, self-poisoning with, chemical birth control. We wouldn't be putting endocrine and hormone disruptors all over our body every day. We wouldn't be engaged in negative self-talk. We wouldn't have this like unconscious stream, this narrative that's constantly going in the background every day about like, how can I be different? How can I be better? How can I improve this? How can I adjust that? Right. So there just is very low self-worth in general, and lack of, vocabulary when it comes to how to listen to the body, and lack of reverence for the body and the female experience. And we don't even know it. And so when we go into the conception and pregnancy and birth space, it's it's to be expected that we would, ask someone, what do I do about this one thing that happened with my body? What do I do with my baby when it makes this sound? Like there's just no concept and no language of how to listen to cues, of how to observe. In our education system, children are not taught to observe. They're taught to memorize and regurgitate. So their perception of things is not really encouraged, right? Like in Waldorf education, for example, there's a lot of support, and encouragement when it comes to observing. So they'll sit and observe something over time, and then their own deductions in that observation is the thing that's true. Because if children are really taught, given the opportunity to sit and listen and watch, they'll see the evolution of something. They're not being told what's going to happen to the thing. They're just being invited to watch and draw their own conclusions. That is just not a skill that like 90% of our population has. And so it makes sense that our baby would get a fever and we would think, oh, we have to go to the urgent care now, or I must get a fever reducer now because I'm not comfortable with this and I don't know what's going on, because no one ever taught us to watch, observe, and see how the body heals itself. So it's really complex. Could spend an entire, day talking, weeks talking about how the disconnect from our own, in our own childhood experience has basically set the foundation for us to feel clueless and overwhelmed and confused about raising a baby child.
And definitely the trust that we don't have, I think, in our bodies to allow things to happen. Um, like when I think about my own experiences between my first one, where I had a doula, I had a midwife. In Canada, they have rotating midwives, and they're very much entrenched into the system here. Between and my second, where I was alone, I was surprised by how much I was able to do just because there was nobody there to tell me that I couldn't. I thought, with my first one, they were like, well, you can't walk at, 10 centimeters. But no, I made a decision right at that moment that I didn't want to make a mess and I went to the toilet, like all of these conscious things that all of a sudden awaken when we have the faith in our bodies to allow things to be.
Yes.
And my question in relation to this is, what do you see the biggest challenge and with regard to education around true risks of birth?
Well, risk is a highly subjective topic. Risk means something completely different to me than it does to the next person. But if we're going by the conventional definition of risk, then there's quite a lot. that's at risk when a woman is pregnant or giving birth. Um, I would say I would wager that pretty much anything that a woman is experiencing in her pregnancy is considered some form of risk. The fact that she's pregnant, the conventional system already sees that as a risk to her life. So that's a difficult question to answer, because it's also a philosophical one, but it depends on which lens you look at this through as well, right? Is like, are you approaching life from a clinical perspective or a legal perspective or a cultural perspective or a spiritual perspective, right? So for me, like, I don't believe that twin vaginal birth is a risk, and conventional wisdom says that it absolutely is. And they don't even go into detail about any gray areas within that. They simply just say it's a risk already, and we're just scheduling a C-section, and that's just the end of it. And a woman accepts that. She doesn't take any, further steps to research, to figure out other, and she's just in this like fear matrix because of it. I wouldn't consider that a risk. I've seen twin births happen, in the hospital and at home vaginally without, with minimal intervention. So, yeah, it's really like you said, it's a matter of trust, and also surrender, and also like what are you willing to let go of? Because I think, like, I saw something on a post recently on Instagram, and this doctor was saying how there's a lot more risk than we're led to believe by a lot of birth influencers or birth educators. And then someone in the comments said, oh yeah, the entire Free Birth Society, they act like nothing ever happens, like nothing ever bad happens. And I think that I think that's misconstrued, because I think one of the tenets of it is that I assume responsibility for my experience regardless of the outcome. I think that's something that's not really understood from the outside. So I was going to write something, but these days I don't have a lot of energy to respond to strangers that I'm not even involved in a conversation, but I felt compelled to say something like, it's a philosophical difference. Like, it's actually just that the outcome is something that they assume responsibility for, whether good or bad. But if you're focused on only one outcome in this birth experience, then yeah, everything is going to seem like a risk, but it's a very outcome driven model. And I think people who are more in touch with their bodies and the experience and this whole initiation are more process focused. I know everybody wants the same thing, right? A healthy mother and baby on the other side of the situation. However, that's just not the nature of life all the time. Like, hospitals or no, doctors or no, technology or not, it's just not the nature of being, an organism, a biological organism. There are certain things that happen that remove certain organisms, and others stay and thrive. But if we are trying to completely beat, and go above the biological unfolding of life, then everything's going to seem risky, and we're going to be only outcome driven.
I also think that the risk is meshed with people who get interventions. Like when I was looking myself at, okay, what are the true risks of having an unmedicated birth? And I found that the statistics out there in scientific literature, they actually combine the numbers. So it doesn't matter whether you had an epidural, whether you had Pitocin, or whether you had a natural birth with zero interventions and zero medications. They mesh the numbers of, let's say, respiratory distress with a baby. Like they're all combined, and that's so misleading. And I actually had to sit down with a pen, paper, and calculator to deduct what was the percentage that we know of system births that are unmedicated that actually require assistance breathing for the baby afterwards. And that percentage was minuscule. It's just that all the numbers are mixed together between, medications that are obviously going to affect the baby, and women are not being told this. You know,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but it's also the responsibility of the woman to do the research, you know. It's not necessarily like a doctor or midwife's job to break down like how to read studies. And you know, it's interesting. I mean, when you look at the trajectory of our evolution, um, you know, the amount of fetal and maternal mortality was never this high as far as what's recorded. And this is a point in time, considering how much technology we have available to us, it's never been this high. And it should be much lower if all of these things are so, you know, all of these interventions are so effective. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's just a really deep lack of critical thinking. And I really encourage women, and I have been over the years, to step out of this role, like this victim role of like, oh, the system wronged me and the system is out to get me. Well, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like why would you participate in something that's not built for you? It's built for a completely different intention. It's a business. And so you walk into this thing expecting like a really deep connected experience where it's completely transparent, and that's just not how it works. So, you know, I just this whole like I was never told. It's like, well, you never asked. And like you also, what do you expect when you're dancing with this type of entity, you know? So I the I don't expect anything different. Like you know, people are like, oh, the system has to do better. And it's like, why do they have to do better? For who? Why don't you just find a different way and stop trying to, you know, like my friend says, get eggs at the hardware store.
Right. And, when women go through, like moms go through a difficult experience during birth, the tricky part that I found for me is that once you move out of being the victim and you no longer blame the system, then you blame yourself. And then you have to deal with the issue of self-forgiveness for that, because then I know for me, I held on to it for a very long time where I should have known better. That was always my perspective. I knew with everything that I knew, all my background, my life, all, I should have known better than to interact with the system in that way the first time. How do you approach that need to forgive, let go, move forward when you help women go from being the victim to taking responsibility and then moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's something that reflects how this woman approaches the rest of her life, you know? And so there's a really big opportunity for alchemy, you know, transforming this experience into something else. And so the fact is, yeah, I should have known better. Like I've made really big decisions in my life, and once in a while look back and think, whoa, like I kind of wish I didn't do that. And what I have to do, because it's the only option, right? There's like, you know, if you look back, you'll turn to salt, right? So it's like the only option that I really have is to understand what it has brought me to now. What is available to me now that I've gone through this really horrific and, you know, kind of life-threatening experience? What is available to me now? And that is something that just comes with, you know, cultivating more emotional intelligence, cultivating more wisdom, the willingness to see things differently. And so women can have huge breakthroughs. They say, yeah, the reason that I was actually not shown that other path and I kept walking this way is because now I have this toolkit. Now I see what's possible. Now I can help other women. Now I can advocate for this. Now I can teach my children. If I would have just gone through it and everything, you know, seemed fine and I'm not, you know, maybe I wouldn't be awake to this. And more of us need to be awake to this because we want more ease, more healing, more expansion, right? So there's always something available behind every highly difficult, highly trying situation. It's just a choice that the woman has to make. Will I continue to blame myself and live in the past, essentially? Or do I want to alchemize it? Do I want to look into the pain? where else in my life have I done something like this? Oh, okay. And then you could probably think of a few instances where you knew better, but you went the other direction. What compels me to go in that direction that causes self-harm? What am I trying to get by walking in the direction of self-harm? What is the unconscious drive to self-sabotage or to self-harm? And, it's a pretty deep journey. And, women don't have to do it. They can just continue suffering and self-loathing and blaming themselves and blaming the system. They don't have to do this alchemical work, but it's available to them. So that's what I walk women through. And what we can access after that is a lot of freedom, because it is a big ball and chain to keep circling the drain and to be in that story. So recently, I was telling you earlier when we were chatting that I was in Canada, and I spoke to many women. I was at the Reclaiming Birth conference. I spoke to many women. I was one of the speakers. I did a demo on stage, for this process that I'm talking about, and it's sometimes pretty brief. But I spoke to a lot of women off stage, personally, and it's like there's part of their identity has a lot to do with that story of suffering. So how willing are we to let go of that and actually just form a new identity? And it's kind of the bigger question.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very important because then with our society as mothers and babies and the relationship between the mom and the baby being so critical to having better people and better questioning humans when that relationship is destroyed, as I've heard you talk about from your past work and I think it was foster care, right? The foster care system, how this destructive relationship is causing us to have a society that's going downhill as far as humans being human, kind, and thinking and making the world a better place, so to speak.
Yeah. What's the question?
Nothing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, working in foster care, it's really what I saw is just that we're at a place now where like no one's coming to rescue us, and it's like there's this idea that like if that system is better, if foster care had funding, or if the hospitals would encourage more doulas. Like, I don't know, we
Right.
have all of these like ideas of like what would just make it this idyllic situation and it would solve the problem. It's not that. It's not the system changing, it's you changing. Like it's you deciding to have a different relationship to yourself, which in turn pretty much solves all of your problems. Um, so yeah, I think that's why I was taken out of that space because it was just like Groundhog's Day, like history repeating itself all the time, and it was just exhausting. Like nothing was ever really improving, and it's just getting people through a circuit so that it looks like good is happening, but it's not really solving the core issue, which is like every human taking responsibility for themselves and changing the relationship they have to themselves. Yeah, it would be so great if we had all these resources. It'd be so great if healthcare was cheaper, right? It's like also, why do I rely on healthcare to have a healthy life? So there's just bigger philosophical questions to be asking and staying in this place of like, my life can't get better until that gets better is it's just a really big waste of time.
What do you think the biggest struggle is with people taking self-responsibility? Like where's the gap? They just don't want it or
I just don't know that that's even a possibility. Like it's not even perceived as a possibility for most people. It comes from how we grow up. It comes from type of a level of codependency that we might have. It comes from lack of self-trust, self-confidence. I think we've been groomed over many generations to rely on this like paternalistic system to make our lives better. So it's like I can't do that until that happens, Like and we learn this is just carved in, or it's just hammered in, I should say, in many small ways. It's like, oh, I can't go to the bathroom at school until I raise my hand and I'm given permission.
Mm.
You know, I can't do this with my property, right? It's like the HOA says I can't do this, so I can't do it. I can plant this because the city has a rule for this. It's like there's all these things where it's like, oh, I can't do any of these things until I have approval, until I'm told that it's good, you know? And this gets into a deeper conversation about like rules and regulations and structures of society in order to maintain a level of, harmony, right? That's a little bit different than trusting your own, impulses and instincts to do certain things with your life. So it's something we're always pushing up against. And unfortunately, we just don't know that we have that capacity. Um, and it's interesting, like even with like my own child, it's like sometimes she'll say to me like, that seems arbitrary. She's 9, and like I'll say something like, oh, we're gonna do this. She's like, that seems arbitrary. Like, why wouldn't we just do that? And I'm like, because it's like it's just in me too. Or she'll tell me like school feels arbitrary, but I go because I enjoy talking to people. you know, it's like for her, it's just like a place where she goes to pass time, and that's like, she has a homeschooling background. This is like her first year or whatever, second year in a school. And she's like, what is this? You know? And she's trying to find the benefit in it. And, she's really sharp and she's solving this and solving that. And she writes this. And, there's a lot that I showed her how to do without needing to ask anyone for approval to think the thing, you know? Like she never asked me for approval to think the thing or to do the thing or to write the thing or to draw the thing. There was no right way to draw the thing. I just was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, tell me about it. I never said, good job. I never said, oh, that's a really well done flower. I just would simply ask her, what do you think about it? She'd be like, oh, I really like it. I like how I did this, or I like how I put the orange there. So I never imposed some sense of like, you've passed, you haven't passed. It's approved, it's not approved. And that comes from, our early childhood, parenting, schooling, and all of that. So that's part of how we support our children in growing up to be adults that accept self-responsibility and become more self-sovereign, is not needing the outside to validate the thing we're feeling. We don't need science to validate our intuition. So yeah, it's a systemic
Where would you
crisis.
start? Like, where would you start? Children, the mother, like to try to instill the idea that you can think for yourself. You can take your own responsibility in all aspects of your life.
Well, yeah, it's so funny because people say like, how will your child operate in society? And it's like, you know, she'll figure it out because she's, learning to trust herself in the way she does things. That's not for me to determine. Like all I can do is set her up with the tools so that she doesn't feel like she's frozen when someone's not directing her. That's all I can do. So, that is something that where women can start or parents can start is really with themselves. Like when a woman wakes up in the morning, it's like, what are my priorities? What's driving me? You know? And what keeps me away from my priorities? And am I getting up right now because I want to, or am I getting up right now because I have to? Because if I don't, this person will be upset, or if I don't, that person won't eat, or if I don't, right? So it's like just starting to build an awareness of why you're doing the things that you do and why you're prioritizing certain things. That awareness in and of itself will start to create a lot of expansion around who's driving me every day. And then it gets deeper into like, oh, is my inner child driving me, right? Because when that inner child still has a lot of unmet needs that we haven't reconciled as an adult, that's going to drive a lot of our decisions, right? The inner child needs XYZ. So that adult woman chooses this type of toxic relationship in order to meet the needs of her girl who's still looking for this certain type of connection, right? So just that awareness first is important. And if you're already parenting and you're like, oh, I might want to do this differently, then you start actually asking your kids to defer to their own judgment for things
Hmm.
and see how that changes. And it's like, well, no, what do you mean? I have to tell them to do this at this time, or they won't learn structure, or they will be, it's like my kid must go to school or they will become a drug addict prostitute, right? It's like I hear so many people say, like, they'll become some vagrant. What? So, will they? Really? Because I have actually never met any adults like who have these issues, right? Just my own small petri dish is like, if they were homeschooled, I actually see them doing a lot of wonderful things with their life. I'm just using this as an example.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of children coming out of that grind of, for example, the public school system. A large percentage of them are just being schooled on, how to be schooled. That's what it is. Like, I'm going to school you on how to be schooled so that you can go into the workforce and continue to be schooled and then, have some sort of breakdown in your 40s or 50s and realize that you haven't been living the life you wanted to live, right? So it's like, I think that with kids, it's a matter of not assuming that they're totally dumb and that they need you to like completely direct every impulse in their entire life. And that takes a lot. We just weren't raised like that.
Yeah.
So
I don't think I've ever heard anybody not say, "Oh, your kids need structure." And I'm like, what? I don't like I mean, personally, I'm probably a completely different than most people because I was homeschooled from grade 2 to grade 8 and I pretty much ran my own life. My mom was like, "Here are the pages to do in your book." And my sister and I arranged our own days. So I understand that it's not like that. You don't need to be indoctrinated into society to function in society. Am I different? Of course. Do I handle crap from bosses in the past when I've been an employee? No. I tell them, here are my boundaries. And if you want something, you have to behave in a certain way to respect them. Sometimes I would get fired. And sometimes they would respect that, but it doesn't affect your success to be able to live in any way, shape, or form, which is silly.
yeah,
Very silly.
yeah, yeah.
But do you think that we should be like everybody's got like this idea, we need to make the school system better or we need to educate people this or educate people that. But if you think about it the way we've been kind of going, that no, it has nothing to do with that. It's about you deciding that I want to take responsibility for my choices, for life, for birth, and I'm comfortable holding on to that responsibility, then the kind of question for me is like, okay, should we bother trying to make more people responsible for themselves or just show people that you can do it?
I mean, I don't focus like I used to, maybe like 6 years ago or so. I was really focused on like everyone else seeing the thing the way that I think they should see it, right? Like, wake up, like, this is available to you? And then I realized like all of this change I wanted to see was really just an inside job. So I directed all my focus onto myself. And through that, a resonance was created that just started attracting a lot of women, which is now why I primarily focus a lot of my energy on the doula trainings that I lead and the birth educator trainings that I lead, because there's a resonance for women who want to do that inside job work. And that's how it starts to ripple out rather than me like standing on some soapbox, trying to get everyone to like see the truth. Because it's not how people, that's not really how change is created. I think, like you said, want to change the school system, want to change the hospital system, like whatever it is, but it just doesn't work that way. It works from the inside out. That's what I've seen anyway. That's where the real change, the lasting change happens. Otherwise it's often superficial, it's temporary, right? It's short-lived and kind of dead ends. So when women want to invest the energy of, coming into a container with me for 5 months, I know that they are ready for a really big, deep transformation that's going to ripple out into their nuclear family, their extended family. It's because of these morphic fields that we're in with people, it just starts to impact with one phrase, one action, one conversation, and it starts to shift and move out and out. So, yeah, I would say that it has to be self-focused for real change to happen.
Yeah. When in your experience, like as a birth educator, Um, do you tend to also take on clients who like to interact with the system and then just try to educate them or offer them support as best as you can? Or do you find that that is difficult for you to, I guess, keep your awareness and not fall into old patterns or habits when you're constantly around that? Like if you're, I don't know how much you do or how much you just focus on doula training or if you witness a lot of births.
Yeah, I still work with clients directly. I still teach classes, not as much. I was doing that multiple times a week for years. And now it's a little bit less so, but I do mostly actually engage with people who engage the system. When it comes to, the women who are pregnant or the couples who are expecting or they're trying to conceive or they're doing IVF. Yeah, I'd say they're mostly like I don't often say maybe like 10% of the people that approach me are like someone who's like really trying to be outside of the system, or they're like maybe they're doing free birth, or maybe they're trying to find some alternate route. And that's a different conversation. But yeah, I'd say most of the people are engaged in the system, either, conventional midwifery or hospital matrix, and it doesn't like impact me at all. Like my information doesn't change. That's the thing. It's not like I'm not giving them my opinion. I'm simply giving them information about what's gonna happen and what's
Right.
possible, and the most typical outcome based on the decisions they want to make. And that's really just the beauty of informed consent. Like there really isn't, I don't have a personal outcome in mind. I'm not, they tell me I want to breastfeed for a year and I don't want my baby to go to the NICU, for example. I'll basically tell them what they should do to avoid those things from happening, to decrease the chances of a NICU stay and to increase the chances of successful breastfeeding long term. This is what a really good effective formula would be. And if you choose not to do it, then you might not get the thing you want.
Right.
And if you choose to do it, then you'll most likely get the thing you want. And I don't have, 100% guarantee, but I'd say 90% of the people I've worked with over the last 15 years, it's pretty consistent with what I've shared. So I wouldn't keep doing it and sharing it and connecting with people if it didn't work. Um, so yeah, and that's the wonderful part is that sometimes I'll get phone calls or emails later on and they'll say, yeah, what you said would happen happened. And I did cave in and I did allow them to give me antibiotics because I was GBS positive, and it did impact my labor and it did slow my contractions, and you know, I did end up getting this and that, and then the baby did end up. So it's like it's not that I'm like predicting, I'm just like this is what the evidence shows. So you have a choice. And so she'll say, like, I let the fear take over me. I felt so much pressure from the nurses who said that I was endangering my baby if I didn't get the antibiotics, and I just couldn't deal with that pressure. So there is a level of, okay, I'm getting information and education, and I also have to work on drawing my boundaries. I also have to work on having my husband has to work on advocating for me as well. Maybe I should have invested in a doula who could have been kind of that support person rather than relying on nurses. So we cover a lot of the dimensions of what it looks like to be in the hospital system. And if we get to a point where every box that what the hospital offers is not checked, then why are we still going there to give birth? So if you don't want anything they have to offer, then why are we going there? And then that's a whole exercise to do on limiting beliefs, on what do I consider safe? What do I consider dangerous? Where do my fears lie? Do I have pre-existing trauma from my own birth because my mother had a highly medicalized birth? Or, then sometimes it can get pretty psycho-emotional.
Mm.
So, what I'm doing with women and men is not just like, this is how you make a birth plan. It actually goes much deeper into their own psyche and their perception of this experience and what they want out of it and how to accomplish it.
I mean, that's excellent that you're able to provide all of that to them and not get drawn into that system. Like, you know what I mean? Sometimes for me, I obviously have nothing to do with birth work. In my work, I work with clients who are overcoming health problems, but generally speaking, I'm not going to work with somebody who wants to interact heavily with the medical system because then one, they're going to get very conflicting advice, working with me and working with them. And two, because for me, I find that it does affect me and my thinking and how I'm able to stay out of the trap of how everyone else is doing things and then making sure that I stay in the ability to parent my kids differently, live life in a way that's more taking responsibility, being sovereign, and all of these things. I want to ask you, like, when it comes to breastfeeding and nursing, what would be one, like, the top things that you would recommend or the advice information that you would provide to women who want to nurse? And what would you say are the most common misconceptions and misadvice that tends to be given to women who are nursing that can sabotage that progress or path?
Gosh, it's a great question, two-part question, and there's a lot, there's a lot there. Um, I have a mini course pretty much on this exact subject matter. So, we've come really far from learning how to breastfeed. It's like a lost art, let's say. And it's interesting because it's like a byproduct of having a baby. However, we've forgotten how to do it. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation about multi-generational households. Little girls don't grow up watching women breastfeed. Maybe they weren't personally breastfed and they certainly aren't seeing other women in the house. Like maybe their, older cousin or their aunt with her kids or, the mother with, younger siblings or whatever it is, or the woman next door who the mom hangs out with breastfeeding. So all of these educational opportunities that girls used to grow up with are gone. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that breastfeeding has become so challenging for most of us. And there's this whole, like, kind of mainstream rhetoric, like, breastfeed until you're comfortable. But if it's affecting your mental health, don't do it. Right? So it's like just bottle feed. There's plenty of formula and babies do okay with it. Right? So unfortunately, we're in this like postpartum rift, postpartum crisis where women are deeply undernourished, they're depleted, they're overwhelmed, they're traumatized from birth. And the first solution that's given to them is cut the baby's needs, right? Don't change the environment. Don't stop trying to work remotely. Don't stop feeling overwhelmed, cleaning the house, cooking, doing everything on your own. Cut the baby's needs, and that'll help you feel better. So we're in this time where we think that cutting the baby's needs first takes precedence over, I don't know, expecting the husband to provide, for example, 100%, right? No, God forbid, we can't stop doing 50-50. So we're in a time where women would rather are encouraged to cut babies' needs before making shifts to their environment and dealing with, more difficult matters, I would say, right? So, they put a snoo on their registry, for example, or some, items that they're told they need in order to have a healthy, happy, baby. where those funds should be allocated and those resources should be allocated to things like, postpartum care, someone who's doing meal prep for 2 months, someone who's coming in every 2, 3 days to clean the house. Those are all things that are just part of making it possible for the woman to recover from birth, to learn how to breastfeed, to connect with her baby, to rest, right? It shouldn't be the other way around. Let me get someone to take care of the baby and let's keep the baby more isolated, deprive them, formula feed them, or put them on a sleep schedule so that I can, work remotely from my computer part-time, and so that I can cook and clean, so that I can entertain guests, so that I can, right? It's just flipped up. It's like we're in the upside down. So say that's like the bigger issue. And then when that starts getting reframed, maybe things will look different. Breastfeeding education should start when we're little girls. And we need to change the way that we're doing postpartum completely. So I think it's, the World Health Organization, if you follow their recommendations, they say that breastfeeding for 2 years is what's recommended for optimal health for that human being, right? So it's like, it's not like this is some wild, like hippie idea that's completely impossible. Like it's actually, there's evidence-based information showing us that a human being is going to have a better longevity, health overall if they're breastfed. So then why are we dedicating zero resources to making that possible? There's small coalitions here and there. There's different organizations that try to educate on it, but society is completely uninviting to this rite of passage for the woman and the baby. So and formula companies, they have a lot of interest. There's a lot of money being made. It's $1 billion industry worldwide. And so would it really benefit them for women to actually overcome hurdles and succeed in breastfeeding? Probably not. So, I think women just have to really look at how they're being marketed to and look at what advice they're getting. I've even heard pediatricians, like sometimes when I'm working postpartum with women, I'll go to the visits with them, just for support or whatever it is. And I've even heard pediatricians say things like, you really only need to breastfeed for 6 months and that should be good. You can start giving the baby some solids at this time. So it's like, just because you can, does it actually mean you should? And pediatricians are not breastfeeding experts. They have specific tasks that they're supposed to accomplish, which are very much in the interest of other industries and not in the interest of the mother and the baby. So I would certainly never seek breastfeeding advice from a pediatrician. I remember I went to the pediatrician once when my daughter was like, I don't know, 3 months old. And I remember her saying, "Oh, your daughter's still sleeping with you." And I was like, "Yeah, how else would I get any sleep unless she's in my bed?" Like, what are you talking about? How could I breastfeed her? And I'm not going to get up and go to another room and take her out of a crib and like trip and like, what? Like, it was just so weird. But she was a friend of my mother's. And so I went. I don't know really why I went. It was one of those, I think my husband at the time, he was like, "We should go," or whatever. And so, yeah, she told me, she says, "This is really dangerous for your baby. You have all these germs and bacteria, and, you're exposing the baby to all of your adult bacteria, and the baby could get really sick." And I was like, "Oh my God, like, you don't know what you're talking about." Like, I'm actually like in a room with someone who has no idea what they're talking about. And I need to leave now. And like, I'm never coming back here. And like, I can't believe that vulnerable women actually come into this office and get this information and then like go off and like put their baby far away and then wonder why their milk supply decreases and wonder why their baby's agitated and wonder why their baby's anxious and crying all the time. You know what I mean? It's just like backwards advice. So, it was one of those moments in my life where I realized like, oh, like letters behind your name actually don't mean that you know anything, and or more than me, I should say. Yeah, you know something, but you don't know more than me about my own baby and my own instincts, right? So that was really, really an awakening for me.
Do you think that, or have you seen, or do you think that, for example, men being in the birth process when they feel powerless or watch something that's distressing, especially when, like my husband shared this with my first, where he found it like he couldn't do anything, like all of these things. Does that affect their ability to then serve on the new mother hand and foot postpartum? You know what I
Um,
mean? Like,
like being part of the birth process, like if they're part of it, it makes them more connected to the postpartum.
if they don't feel powerless, like, do you find that if they don't feel powerless, if they don't feel like the situation was completely out of their control and they experience the men's version of that wave and crash of birth, do you think that that helps them step up and really care for the mother extra in the postpartum?
I have seen, like, I don't know if this has been studied, maybe it has. I wouldn't know right now, but what I have seen is that when men are more engaged in the process, they are more engaged in the postpartum. I mean, are we going to see like incredible results just because he was at the birth? Are we going to see like a transformation in postpartum? I wouldn't say yes, but I do see that they are more participatory and they do understand what she's gone through. When a woman receives a lot of interventions, when a doctor, like a male doctor, for example, is very involved in the process with the woman, this actually has done something a lot to the relationship of the woman and the man. I have seen that women who feel violated, and it's funny because it's like the logical mind is saying, like, no, this is a doctor. They are here to help me. I trust them. They are a credentialed individual or whatever. But there's still the animal body that's like, I'm, being touched and hands are being inserted and things are being cut by this person who I don't actually really know or trust. And my husband is here watching it happen. And so there's almost like this really deep sense of violation that she can't quite name, and a lot of resentment and frustration can build up, and I have seen it impact the relationship. She loses, interest and attraction to her husband. I've seen that happen a lot. So, you didn't protect me, you didn't empower me, you didn't advocate for me, and that's just the messaging that comes across. So as a birth educator, my classes are set up for men and women to take the class together. And I'm so fortunate that over the last like decade or so, 85%, let's say, of the couples that come in, the man is like really involved. He does the homework, he does the exercises, he takes interest. Like he can, like when we do quizzes, he answers. I've sat in on other types of birth education, like hypnobirthing, different classes. I took a training in hypnobirthing. I never taught it. It never called to me as like a method for birth education. It's more like a relaxation education.
Mhm.
Um, but I remember the men like, on their phones, kind of tuning out, they're there because it's the right thing to do to be there, but they were not engaged, you know. And I love to say that the men who were engaged in my classes, they like really showed up as the birth coach for her. And those men are so involved in the postpartum. Like they feel invested and they feel like they were a part of the success of the experience, which they were. And so I see them much more like excited to go back to work to provide so she can be home, or excited to come home and do baby wearing, or excited to be the one to do the bath, like just more excitement and engagement. And they also know, because of the birth education with me, that and it's not really until the baby like engages with them, maybe smiles, that they get this hormonal surge of bond that promotes the bonding for them. It's different than the woman's bonding, which is highly dependent on oxytocin. Men, when they get that feedback from the baby, that's really when a lot of that bonding starts to kick in. So they know from my classes that doesn't happen for a few months sometimes. So they have to override that feeling of like, does the baby even care that I'm here? Which kind of like for men, that comes up. I've never heard a woman say like, does the baby care I'm here? Like, I've never heard that from a woman. We're just so different. So there's also an acknowledgement, like we're two totally different biological beings. And we have to shift perspective, that the relationship is going to be different between the mother and the baby. So yeah, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but I really do feel like men don't have to catch babies. They don't have to, you know, do the things that sometimes we see on social media. It's not about that. It's more about their energetic presence and their commitment to the process and them allowing the woman to say, I don't want to do that, or I want to do this, and kind of holding her through that process. So, I've many couples, the woman wants to do a home birth, and the man's like, no, we're going to the hospital. Like, that's dangerous. So, you're not allowing her intuition or her instinct to actually drive her experience with her body, and it's like, I ask men, well, what about the hospital feels safer to you? Like, what is this emergency thing that you're so worried about? And like, let's talk about it. And often he can't even name what he's worried about. And he can't even actually describe what's safer about the hospital. Like it's just this like autopilot kind of response, like a pre-recorded response to
Yeah.
the dynamic. And so that when men can be open to changing their perspective, that is highly attractive to the woman and it makes her feel very safe.
Bring you back to breastfeeding. Um, what do you think are the best things for a woman who wants to successfully breastfeed to learn? Like I found myself that there's a huge discrepancy between lactation consultants that are here, there's lactation consultants paid by the hospital, and those that are private, and even a lactation consultant, even La Lush League, which I tried attending because I was really passionate about breastfeeding. I found that breastfeeding is instinctual. It's not something that you can really, the information is just, I don't know, weird. Like even let's weigh the baby. I know. Let's weigh the baby to find out how much milk they drank. I'm like, that doesn't work. Have you tried weighing yourself after a meal?
Oh my God, don't get me started on people counting ounces. It's such a neuroses. Yeah, and like La Leche League, they say chest feeding now. So I wouldn't even refer to them anymore. Like if you're going to buy the Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, just get the eighth edition and don't bother because they've become totally like apprehended by political ideology. So, for a woman to have successful breastfeeding, she also has to, it starts way before the birth. So the choices she makes in the pregnancy and in the birth are going to also dictate it, right? So if she makes choices that lead her up to a traumatic experience or a high intervention experience, which we know there's evidence that fentanyl affects breastfeeding, and fentanyl is what's inside of the epidural. We know that we lower our chances of successful breastfeeding when we get C-sections, right? And some people might say, well, I had an emergency C-section. So the amount of true emergency C-sections is so small compared to the amount of, quote, emergency unplanned C-sections we have now. So many women who are not high risk end up in unplanned C-sections because they were not educated on how different interventions impact their birth, right? So tips for successful breastfeeding, it's not like, oh, drink oat straw tea. No, it's like, how do you change the way that you're approaching birth? Do you have a postpartum plan in place? I mean, this is why I ended up riffing on postpartum because so much of our postpartum environment actually dictates whether we're going to be successful in breastfeeding or not. So, a woman who's sustained birth trauma, she's like a frayed wire and she's trying to reconcile that. So breastfeeding is just not like tapping in or dropping into her instincts to breastfeed. That's just not available when you've just recently been traumatized. So it's like getting a lactation consultant in there. No, we have to like process what happened at the birth and not gaslight her.
Mm.
Lactation consultants, for the most part, are also trained by an institution that's more like, oh, don't sacrifice your mental health, let's just bottle feed. Very rarely do I hear lactation consultants saying, let's change your environment so that you can successfully breastfeed. Let's process your birth. Let's change your diet, right? Let's start eating more fats, let's eat more protein, eat consistently, small meals throughout the day, sleep at these times, like actual lifestyle changes. All of them now, from what I hear, are like, well, let's bottle feed or let's supplement or let's get rid of this tongue tie or this lip tie. It's like, that's all they're talking about now, are not focusing on what is causing the woman to go into a highly adrenalized state, what's depleting her, and what's making it actually hard for her to drop into her instincts. So, yeah, it's a bigger thing than just some tips on what to do, like what boppy to get or whatever that pillow
I
is for
think
breastfeeding.
the biggest takeaway from that is if you're struggling, you need to process your birth trauma. I think that that's a really significant thing.
Yeah, and if you don't suspect that you had birth trauma, what is keeping you in a suspended state of survival while you're trying to breastfeed? And it's like, well, okay, my environment or my relationship, or I'm undernourished, or I don't have enough help. Okay. So are all the different things that keep us suspended. Or oh, everything seems like it's in place. I have the support. Okay. So maybe it's something deeper. Maybe there's body trauma. Maybe there's something from, I worked with a client because I'm a lactation consultant as well. I worked with a client, this was about 8 years ago, and my baby's always agitated. My baby has colic. Every time I try to breastfeed, he doesn't like my milk. And so I just asked her to tell me, like, tell me about your own breastfeeding experience. Did your mom breastfeed you? She was like, why is that relevant? Like that was, 30 something years ago. And I'm like, well, tell me about it. What do you know about breastfeeding? She's like, well, my mom didn't breastfeed me. And my mom went back to work, shortly after I was born. And I grew up with my grandmother and my aunt. And so as we kept talking, she started having like an emotional release and crying. I was like, well, what's coming up for you? And pretty much she was like, she's like, sometimes I feel like I'm not as healthy because I wasn't breastfed. And sometimes I feel like I don't really have, and then all this stuff about her relationship with her mom, emerged from this conversation. So it's like, she didn't have the blueprint for the breastfeeding connection, the mother baby dyad. So there was still a lot of grief she needed to process. I'm not saying that this is the case for everyone. Okay, like, some of you might have severe trauma and you breastfed, it's fine. Okay, but we're talking about people who are having issues breastfeeding. Colic is a direct reflection of the mother's nervous system. It's not because the mother's like eating too much broccoli or something and needs to do like an elimination diet. The baby is simply a mirror to her nervous system. So this baby was simply mirroring a lot of this underlying grief, a lot of this stress, a lot of these feelings of lack of inadequacy, of lack of adequacy to breastfeed. Like there was a lot going on in this woman that was really, I could see it. She was just underneath the surface, just buzzing, right? So there's nervous system work to do as well, for successful breastfeeding. So it's deeper and it deserves just as much importance and education and attention as the birth.
Yeah. And I want to just draw a little conclusion and tie to that to light when it comes to colic and the nervous system. In all the research, we know that it's not just your emotions that are negative affecting your nervous system, but also your light environment that are going to spike your cortisol. And babies, they're so sensitive to this. And I have seen this with clients that I work with who are nursing and my own children, that once you address the light environment in your home, colic disappears and the baby sleeps more at night, even though they're still in the infant stage of nursing. Like so many clients were like, oh, my newborn baby is sleeping 5 hours all of a sudden just because I don't use LEDs anymore. And we step out for 10 minutes at sunrise, all these critical things that is going to affect your nervous system too, right? Calm you
Yeah.
down, make you more relaxed, and
Totally. And
pull
women
you
are like,
along.
trying to breastfeed their baby and they have their cell phone, like they're scrolling and like just radiating their baby, and wondering like, what's going on? Why am I depleted? Like, why am I producing no melatonin? Why can't I sleep? So there are a lot of habits that, again, we have to take self-responsibility.
Yeah. I think self-responsibility is definitely the theme to everything in
Right.
this. And part of me still believes that people need to see others taking self-responsibility in order for it to maybe come into their awareness that this is even an option for them.
Yeah.
Like, hearing that someone else has done it,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
important too. Um, just to wrap it up, where can people find you, interact with you? What do you offer?
Yeah, I'm at uncoveringbirth.com. I have a lot of free resources, master classes, and many courses for men and women who are at any stage in their process. And then I also have the training. So if you feel called to work with women in birth or in postpartum, or you want to be a birth educator, we have programs for that. They're highly transformational uh, coaching programs that you get a professional certification at the end, but they're really just transformative for life in general. And so they're very special. And yeah, and then I'm also on Instagram creating little videos and snippets here and there for micro learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.